Are you tired of feeling lost and unfulfilled? Do you crave a deeper understanding of your purpose in life? Maybe you've caught yourself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there's something more you're supposed to grasp, some hidden layer beneath the noise of everyday life. If so, you're not alone. Not even close. Deep thinking isn't just about pondering the universe, it's a transformative practice that can unlock profound insights about yourself and your place in the world. It's not some elite intellectual exercise, either. It's accessible. It's human. It's yours. Picture this: you're standing at the edge of a quiet lake at midnight, cool breeze on your face, the stars overhead wheeling like ancient questions. You wonder why you're here. What it all means. And somehow, just standing there, not needing an answer, that feels meaningful in itself. You probably won't know this, but the average person has over 6,000 thoughts a day. Most of them are nonsense. Grocery lists. Vague worries. Replays of conversations from 2009. But every now and then, one of those thoughts stops you. It whispers, "Why?" Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. Your mind begins to wander. That little why won't let go. It clings to your ribcage like it's part of your anatomy. And honestly, it kind of is. The hunger for meaning might just be the most stubbornly human trait you possess. You ask why because your brain, unlike a toaster or a jellyfish or even your neighbor's Pomeranian, is uniquely designed to generate internal narratives. You're wired to create stories, patterns, explanations, anything to connect the dots between chaos and coherence. And the question of why goes deep, prehistoric deep. Archaeologists have unearthed 100,000-year-old burial sites with carefully placed artifacts. No practical reason. Just meaning. Early humans already sensed that there had to be more to life than gathering berries and not getting eaten by saber-toothed cats. They buried their dead with tools and tokens. Maybe it was ritual. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear. Either way, it proves something big. Even when we didn't have language, we had questions. Here's something intriguing. There's evidence that Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, performed primitive rituals too. You might think you're so advanced, but guess what? Even your extinct cousins were lighting fires and staring into them, wondering what the point of it all was. In modern times, those same questions haven't gone away, they've just been repackaged. You may not be sacrificing goats or painting cave walls, but you might be doom-scrolling Reddit threads at 2 a.m., wondering if consciousness is just a glitch. Or you're taking personality quizzes not to waste time, but because you're genuinely searching for clues to who you are. It's the same impulse. Just shinier packaging. A long-standing debate in psychology centers on the origins of this impulse. Are you born seeking meaning, or do you develop that craving as a byproduct of culture? Some researchers argue it's evolutionary. Thinking deeply helped our ancestors survive by planning for the future and analyzing threats. Others suggest it's existential. Our consciousness creates discomfort with randomness, so we reach for structure. Both might be true. Or neither. The jury's still very much out. You've probably also noticed this. The more time you spend distracted, the louder those why questions get once everything goes quiet. You step into the shower. Or go for a walk without your phone. Or lie down in bed, lights off. Suddenly, wham! Your brain goes full philosopher. You didn't even schedule it. It just shows up, unsolicited. Like a friend who lets themselves into your apartment and starts rearranging the furniture. Kind of rude, but also helpful. That's the thing about deep thinking. It's not always neat or comfortable. It shows up in messes. In heartbreaks. In late-night insomnia. In long car rides and empty rooms. But if you follow it, if you actually dare to go where it's leading, it starts to assemble something profound out of what look like emotional laundry piles. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and the author of Man's Search for Meaning, once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Frankl believed that suffering wasn't meaningless, but it demanded that you assign meaning to it. That you create purpose not by avoiding pain, but by responding to it. You may not always control what happens, but you do control how you interpret it. You might find this surprising. Research in positive psychology shows that people who spend time reflecting on meaning report higher life satisfaction, even if they don't find clear answers. That's important. It's not about solving the mystery. It's about engaging with it. Leaning in. Letting the question become part of your internal landscape. Now, let's address a little myth. Deep thinkers aren't just quiet weirdos in cardigans, hunched over notebooks in cafes. You can be a surfer, a truck driver, a stay-at-home parent, a gamer, a nurse, a barber, and still be deeply philosophical. Thinking hard isn't a job title. It's a habit. It's a lens. It's something you cultivate. And you? You're already doing it. Right now. As your mind softens into that idea, another subtle shift happens. You start to realize that your restlessness, your constant seeking, isn't a flaw. It's a signal. You're not broken for asking big questions. You're awake. So tonight, as your head sinks into the pillow and the world dims around you, hold on to that tiny flicker of curiosity. It's not trying to stress you out. It's trying to invite you somewhere. Somewhere deeper. That pull toward meaning, that itch behind your thoughts, isn't going anywhere. It's always been part of you. It always will be. And that, beautiful insomniac, is where your journey begins. Boredom. It's one of those sensations you try to dodge like a bad smell, rolling through TikTok, clicking through email, rechecking the fridge for the 5th time even though you know there's nothing new inside. You chase stimulation like your survival depends on it. But what if that boredom you dread is actually the start of something important? What if it's not a void, but an invitation? Boredom is sneaky. It doesn't just whisper, "You're not entertained." It says, "Something's off." When the noise dies down and the dopamine dries up, your brain does something strange. It starts to dig. Not because you asked it to, but because boredom is the psychological equivalent of an itch you can't ignore. And when you scratch it, things start to get weird. You might find this unexpected. Studies show that boredom activates the same regions of the brain associated with creativity and problem solving. Yep. That restless, pacing energy you feel when nothing satisfies you? It's your mind entering a low-power, reboot mode, clearing the background apps, nudging you to think instead of consume. One study from the University of Central Lancashire had participants complete the most mind-numbingly dull task imaginable, copying phone numbers out of a directory. Afterward, they were given creative challenges. Turns out, those who were bored out of their skulls performed better than those who weren't. Why? Because their brains had already slipped into exploratory mode. A kind of mental sandbox. But here's where it gets funny. You're addicted to avoiding boredom. You'll do anything not to sit in it. Streaming, scrolling, ordering things you don't need from late-night Amazon binges. Sound familiar? You treat boredom like a threat when it's actually a threshold. An odd but true fact, in the 18th century, people believed boredom was a sign of weak character or even moral decay. The wealthy would send their children on elaborate, grand tours through Europe just to avoid mental stagnation. Imagine telling your boss today, "Sorry, I'm feeling introspectively bland. I'll be taking 3 months to discover myself in Tuscany." Good luck with that. But maybe those powdered wig people were onto something. Because boredom is more than a lack of excitement, it's a psychological nudge toward a more complex state. The French call it ennui, a kind of slow spiritual erosion that can only be cured by, well, you figuring out what matters. There remains considerable disagreement among psychologists about boredom's actual function. Is it simply a lack of stimulation? Or is it a warning light on your existential dashboard saying, "You're off track"? Some theories suggest it's evolutionary. a leftover urge to seek novelty so you don't get eaten by a saber-toothed salad. Others argue it's moral, a signal that you're living too far from your values. But no one quite agrees. You, though, you know how it feels. That gnawing hollowness. The kind that makes you question what you're even doing here. And what's wild is, those moments of discomfort are often the starting point of the deepest insights. You start wondering if your job means anything. If your routine has purpose. If your relationships actually nourish you or just fill the calendar. And then, like a pebble dropped in a still pond, the ripples start. Who am I without all the distractions? What do I even want? What does meaning mean to me? That's the real power of boredom. Not the irritation, but the way it pulls back the curtain on your automatic life. You're not just killing time when you scroll aimlessly, you're sedating the part of you that's itching to grow. You might recall a time it happened to you. Maybe you sat on a train with no Wi-Fi. Or got stuck on a long flight after your phone died. Suddenly, your thoughts stretched. Old memories floated up. Big, uninvited questions slipped in. At first, they felt uncomfortable, like wearing wet socks. But then something softened. And maybe, just maybe, you touched a part of yourself you hadn't heard from in a long while. Here's something interesting. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard argued that boredom is the root of all evil, not because it's bad, but because it provokes the anxiety of choice. When you're bored, you're faced with the terrifying realization that you can choose anything. That freedom? Kind of horrifying. And kind of amazing. So what if you didn't resist boredom next time? What if, instead of numbing it, you followed it? Let it pull you into deeper waters? Maybe you'd start writing again. Or painting. Or walking without earbuds, letting the wind in your ears and the questions in your chest. Maybe you'd start asking what your values are. What matters enough to make you sit in the silence and listen? Because deep thinking isn't flashy. It doesn't come with a loading bar or a reward chime. It arrives in stillness. In stretches of unscheduled thought. In the awkwardness of your own unfiltered self. Boredom, strangely enough, might be your brain's way of guiding you home. It's worth noticing, too, how most profound breakthroughs in history didn't happen in moments of chaos. They happened in quiet. Archimedes in a bathtub. Newton under a tree. Buddha under a tree too, actually. Trees seem to be a theme. But really, it's the quiet that unlocks something different. The stillness clears the fog. And you don't need a fig tree in India to do it. You just need permission to stop avoiding discomfort. To stop cramming every second with novelty. To make room for nothing. Because in that nothing, the real questions arrive. So the next time you're bored, really bored, resist the urge to reach for your phone. Just for a second. Let the restlessness stir. Watch what floats up. Let your mind get a little weird. Let it poke around in old boxes. Because that itch in your brain? That's not a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something's about to happen. And that slow tension pulling at the edges of your thoughts right now? That's the spark of your next deeper self trying to break through. So now that you've sat in the thick soup of boredom and let your brain stretch a little, you may notice something else sneaking in: mental clutter. Thoughts stacked on top of thoughts. Unfinished worries. Shopping lists tangled with regrets. It's like someone turned your mind into a desktop with 42 tabs open, most of them playing music from invisible speakers. And this is where mental minimalism enters the picture, not as a trendy buzzword you slap on a productivity blog, but as an actual practice. Not for cleaning your kitchen drawers, but for clearing a deeper kind of space, your cognitive bandwidth. You might think deep thinking is about piling on more knowledge, more reflection, more questions. But often, it's actually about subtracting. Cutting through the noise so you can hear what's already there. Imagine your thoughts are like a crowded party. Sometimes, you have to ask everyone to leave just to figure out who you actually invited in the first place. Let's say it plainly, you can't think deeply when you're mentally constipated. Here's something unexpected. A 2010 study out of Harvard found that people spend nearly 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they're doing. Nearly half your mental life is somewhere else. Not here. Not now. Floating in a fog of half-thoughts and what-ifs. And the researchers found this wandering state usually makes people less happy. Not more. So what's the fix? You don't need a monastery. Or a minimalist gray sweater. You need space between your thoughts, and for that, you start small. One of the simplest tools. Journaling. Not glamorous, but surprisingly powerful. When you write your thoughts down, raw, unedited, it's like pulling files out of an overflowing drawer. Suddenly, you can see what you've been unconsciously carrying. An odd but true detail, Leonardo da Vinci left behind over 7,000 pages of messy, chaotic notebooks. Most weren't masterpieces. They were half-thoughts. Doodles. Word fragments. Shopping lists mixed with engineering sketches. Why? Because he understood something important: emptying the mind makes room for real insight. Think of it as brain decluttering with a dash of flair. You might have tried meditation once, felt awkward, and bailed before minute 3. That's okay. But here's the thing, meditation isn't about being good at thinking nothing. It's about watching the flood of your thoughts without grabbing onto them. It's mental minimalism in practice. You clear space not by force, but by noticing. Just noticing. That's it. And in that moment, when a single thought floats by and you let it go, you feel it. The spaciousness. The breath of silence in your brain. It doesn't last long. But it's real. And it's a door. There's an ongoing debate in cognitive science about whether our brains are predictive engines or blank slates. Are we always forecasting based on past patterns? Or are we empty vessels shaped entirely by input? Regardless of the side you lean toward, both suggest one thing clearly: the less noise in your mind, the more accurate your self-reflection becomes. Because clarity isn't a volume knob, it's an off switch. You don't need to yell over your own mental chatter. You need to hush the crowd. And yet, most of the time, you fill the silence automatically. Podcasts in the shower. Music on every walk. You answer texts while brushing your teeth. Even sleep gets multitasked. White noise, sleep tracking apps, guided affirmations. You layer your life so thick that your own thoughts can't reach the surface. That's not your fault. It's just the atmosphere you live in. But what if, just once this week, you didn't fill the gap? What if you went on a walk with no soundtrack? Sat in your car before going inside, just breathing? Gave yourself 5 sacred minutes between appointments to do nothing? You might find it awkward at first. Your brain will throw a tantrum. It'll remind you of texts you haven't sent, groceries you forgot, exes you still low-key Google. But if you sit through that static long enough, a strange calm starts to rise. Mental minimalism isn't the absence of thought. It's the presence of intention. You're not erasing your mind. You're choosing what gets real estate. You're deciding who gets to speak inside your head and who gets politely escorted out. Think about it. Would you let just anyone walk into your house, sit on your couch, and start screaming about how you're not good enough? No. Then why let thoughts like that move into your brain rent-free? You might find this quirky. Japanese Zen monks use something called enso, a simple circle drawn in ink, as a practice in mental clarity. The idea isn't perfection. It's presence. Each circle is different, flawed, organic. It's not about precision, it's about letting your mind become so still that your hand simply moves. What would your version of that be? Maybe it's sketching circles. Maybe it's washing dishes without rushing. Maybe it's staring at a candle flame for 5 minutes until your brain stops narrating everything. Whatever form it takes, that stillness becomes sacred space. And in that space, deeper thoughts emerge, not the noisy, panicked ones, but the slow, quiet truths you usually drown out. You start noticing patterns. Feeling nudges. Recalling things you'd buried. And slowly, gently, the fog lifts. This isn't about becoming a monk. You can still binge your shows, text your friends, fall into rabbit holes about otters holding hands. But every now and then, you pause. You breathe. You subtract. And in that subtraction, something richer unfolds. Not louder. Not faster. Just clearer. So tonight, as you rest, think about what you can let go of. Just one thing. One cluttered thought. One imaginary rule you've been following. One judgment that's overstayed its welcome. Create the space. The thinking will come. Now that your mind has tasted that rare thing, space, it's time to talk about what begins to grow in that newly cleared mental garden, self-awareness. And let's be honest, self-awareness is not the glamorous, mirror-gazing concept Instagram would like you to believe. It's not about declaring your Enneagram type in your bio or knowing which Hogwarts house you'd be sorted into, even though you've definitely thought about it. No, self-awareness is slower. More uncomfortable. It's the long, slow burn of seeing yourself not just as the person you want to be, but also as the person you've been avoiding. And weirdly enough, the more space you give your mind, the more it begins to introduce you to, well, you. It often starts in small, unexpected moments. You snap at someone and immediately hear the echo of your tone in your own ears. Or you catch yourself faking a smile in a meeting and wonder, why do I do that? You walk past a mirror and, not to be dramatic, you don't fully recognize the person staring back. Here's something surprising. Research from the Harvard Business Review shows that while 95% of people believe they're self-aware, only about 10-15 truly are. Which means most people are walking around in a very confident fog. Like cats who think they're lions. What makes self-awareness so elusive? Part of the answer lies in how your brain protects you. It builds narratives, nice ones. Safe ones. It tells you stories that keep your ego warm at night. I'm a good person. I'm doing my best. I had no choice. And sometimes those things are true. But sometimes, they're camouflage. A long-standing controversy in psychology revolves around whether self-awareness is a stable trait or a developable skill. In other words, are some people just born with better inner vision? Or can you train yourself to see more clearly? While there's no final verdict, the emerging consensus leans toward developable. Like a muscle you flex. Like squinting into your own soul until it starts coming into focus. Let's zoom into how that clarity happens. Often, it begins when something breaks. A job falls through. A relationship ends. A goal you've been chasing fizzles out. And suddenly, your emotional GPS starts glitching. You realize you've been operating on autopilot. That's when the deeper questions sneak in. Who was I doing this for? Do I even like this version of myself? What would happen if I stopped pretending? These questions hurt a little. Okay, a lot. But they're also kindling. You can't start the fire of self-awareness without burning off a few old illusions first. Here's a quirky detail. The word personality comes from the Latin persona, which means mask. The ancient Greeks used it to describe the masks worn by actors on stage. So when you talk about discovering your true self, you're literally peeling back the theatrical version of you. The curated, costume-wearing, socially trained self that plays the role. Beneath that mask, someone quieter. Someone real. That's why solitude plays such a critical role here. Not isolation. Not loneliness. But solitude, the intentional time away from external noise. It's in those moments that your inner voice gets brave enough to speak. And let's be real, it doesn't always say nice things. Sometimes it whispers things like, you're not as kind as you think you are. Or you're hiding behind productivity. Or even worse, you don't know what you want. Oof. But once you stop flinching, you'll notice something else. That voice? It's not attacking you. It's inviting you. To drop the performance. To look inwards. To start untangling what's true from what's just habit. One mainstream psychological framework that explores this is the Johari window. It divides yourself into 4 quadrants: the part known to both you and others, open; the part known only to others, blind; the part known only to you, hidden; and the part known to no one, unknown. Deep thinking shines a light on those last 2. Especially the unknown. That's where your potential lives. Also, your unexamined trauma. Yay! And yet, as scary as it sounds, this unfolding of awareness is one of the most freeing experiences you'll ever have. You realize you can stop pretending. You can stop performing for an imaginary audience. You can stop trying to live up to versions of yourself that don't even fit anymore. Here's something else to chew on. Carl Jung believed that becoming aware of your unconscious desires, the things you don't even realize are driving you, is the essence of individuation, or becoming whole. That's where real freedom begins. Not in controlling everything, but in knowing yourself deeply enough to choose consciously. But don't expect an epiphany parade. Self-awareness isn't a thunderclap. It's more like a dimmer switch. You notice something about yourself. You sit with it. You act on it. You forget. You remember. You go deeper. And suddenly, 3 years later, you're making better choices without even realizing why. That's the magic of it. You might find this surprising. Some therapists now use parts work or internal family systems, IFS, to help people map out the different versions of themselves: the angry part, the scared part, the achiever, the caretaker. Each one has a voice. Each one has a story. You're not a single fixed identity. You're a whole cast of characters learning how to share a stage. And deep thinking? That's your backstage pass. So as your eyes grow heavy and the edges of your day start to blur, let that idea settle in. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be perfectly aware. You just need to listen. To make space. To notice when you flinch and ask gently, why? Because each layer you peel back brings you closer to yourself. The real you. The one beneath the mask. And maybe, just maybe, that self is already enough. So now you're starting to see yourself more clearly, less illusion, more honesty. But even with this inner awareness, a tricky realization begins to form. Knowing who you are doesn't always tell you why you're here. That's where we need to pause and talk about a frustrating truth. Meaning isn't in the math. You've probably been taught, directly or indirectly, that life is a puzzle to solve. An equation. A spreadsheet of variables: career, relationships, hobbies, health, and if you just plug in the right numbers, voila, fulfillment. But here's the kicker. You can do all the right things, meet all your goals, optimize every waking minute, and still feel hollow. Still feel like something's missing. Because meaning isn't something you solve. It's something you experience. And logic alone can't build it for you. One mainstream psychology study that might surprise you looked at 2 distinct life paths. One focused on happiness, pleasure, ease, comfort, and the other on meaning, challenge, growth, sacrifice. Guess which group reported deeper satisfaction over time? Yep. The meaning seekers. Even though they were more stressed, more tired, and less happy in the moment. Turns out, meaning is often inconvenient, but it lasts. The issue has sparked significant intellectual debate. Can meaning be constructed rationally, or is it fundamentally emotional and intuitive? Philosophers like Kant argued for a moral, reason-based framework. Existentialists like Camus and Kierkegaard rejected that, saying the absurdity of life makes meaning a defiant, personal act. Still others believe it emerges only in community, in action, in love. But you? You already know the answer in your bones. Think about it, the most meaningful moments in your life probably didn't make sense on paper. They weren't cost-effective. They didn't follow logic. You sacrificed for someone. You stood up for something when it was hard. You kept going when no one was watching. That's meaning. That's what your brain can't calculate, but your heart recognizes instantly. Here's something interesting. Studies in neuroscience show that when people make decisions based on emotion, Gut feeling, intuition. The brain often knows what it wants before the logical part catches up. We're talking milliseconds. So when you feel pulled towards something meaningful, that's not irrational. That's biology reminding you you're more than a calculator. Now, let's talk about intuition for a second, because it gets a bad rap. People treat it like it's mystical fluff, like tarot for your frontal lobe. But intuition is just fast, experience-shaped knowing. It's the wisdom of your subconscious putting patterns together before your conscious mind can make a PowerPoint about it. And the more you reflect, the more you tune into it. An odd but true fact: Nobel Prize-winning physicist Niels Bohr once said he trusted his intuition even when it made no logical sense, because intuition had a way of seeing around corners logic hadn't reached yet. If a quantum genius can lean into his gut, maybe you can too. Think of it this way: logic is a map, but intuition is the compass. The map shows you possible routes, but the compass tells you which one feels right. The path of meaning is rarely the shortest. It's rarely paved. Sometimes it's uphill. Sometimes it's in the rain. But your inner compass nudges you forward anyway. And if you've ever ignored that nudge, taken the job because it paid more, stayed in the relationship because it made sense, kept doing what was expected because it was safe, you know how fast that logic-based life can sour. That hollow ache returns. That whisper of "this isn't it." But when you follow that tug, no matter how inconvenient, it leaves a glow behind. Even if it ends in failure. Because something inside you knows, at least I was true. Now let's be clear, this doesn't mean logic has no place. Your brain's rational capacities are brilliant tools. But they're not everything. They're not designed to hold the full weight of your purpose. They can measure steps, but they can't define the path. A great analogy? Think of logic as the flashlight. It helps you navigate the terrain right in front of you. But meaning? Meaning is the sky. You can't touch it, can't trap it in a formula. But it's always there, shimmering above you, pulling your gaze upward. You might find this surprising. People facing major life decisions often feel more clarity when they imagine their life from the end, looking back. This end-of-life perspective is used in therapy, coaching, even corporate leadership. Why? Because when you imagine what will truly matter when everything's said and done, logic takes a back seat. And what takes over? Values. Love. Integrity. The intangibles. So maybe tonight, in the quiet hum of your thoughts, ask yourself this: if nothing made sense but everything felt real, what would I choose? What would I give my time, my love, my energy to? What lights up my insides even if it confuses everyone else? There's no algorithm for that. No spreadsheet. Just your breath. Your longing. Your humanity. One last quirky tidbit before we drift: the ancient Greeks had two words for time: chronos, clock time, and kairos, meaningful time, divine timing. Chronos measures your minutes. Kairos asks what those minutes meant. And deep thinking? That's the only way you access kairos. So if your logical brain is still racing, still trying to build a blueprint for life, you can let it rest now. Let it sit beside you like a trusted assistant, not the boss. You've got other tools. Softer ones. Smarter, in a way. They whisper rather than shout. They pull instead of push. And tonight, maybe that's enough. As your mind continues to wander, it begins to do something beautifully strange. It starts to see patterns. Faces in clouds. Meaning in numbers. Messages in song lyrics that hit just a little too hard at exactly the right time. This isn't just your imagination being dramatic. It's your brain doing what it was built to do: connect dots. Because when you think deeply, your brain shifts from linear logic to something more fluid. More metaphorical. It starts weaving together memories, impressions, sensations, pulling symbolism from the rubble of daily life. That weird dream where you were stuck in an elevator with your 5th grade teacher? It's not random. Your brain is using the language of symbols to explore what it can't say out loud. This dreamlike connection making is a key part of how humans build meaning. We're not just thinkers, we're interpreters. And your brain loves a good metaphor, even if you pretend you're more of a spreadsheets and skepticism type. One mainstream study from the University of Michigan found that people who were asked to reflect on emotionally significant experiences, and describe them metaphorically, reported higher levels of meaning and clarity than those who described the same events literally. So yeah, calling your breakup a cracked mirror, or your job loss a long exhale, might sound poetic, but your brain actually prefers it that way. You might find this surprising. There's a whole branch of psychology called symbolic interactionism that studies how humans use shared symbols, language, gestures, rituals, to make sense of the world and themselves. Even your handshake means something. Even your tattoos. Even your Spotify playlists at 2 a.m. And when you're in a deep thinking state, these symbols become more vivid. You start seeing messages where you used to see randomness. A stranger's passing words stick in your head. A book you almost didn't read unlocks something old and unresolved. A color. A song. A smell. They all start echoing. Just a quirky detail. Carl Jung kept a massive journal called the Red Book filled with his dreams, visions, and wild symbolic sketches. He called it an experiment in active imagination, a way to converse with the subconscious. And some of it reads like trippy poetry written during a particularly intense full moon. But it was all part of his deep search for meaning, through symbol, not logic. There remains considerable disagreement among psychologists about the actual value of these symbolic patterns. Are they real insights? Or just your brain firing off fireworks for fun? Some argue they're signs of deeper truths. Others call it apophenia, the tendency to see patterns in meaningless data. But either way, what matters is how it feels. If a dream, a symbol, or a phrase sparks clarity in you, does it really matter whether it's objectively true? Because here's the thing, meaning doesn't need to be universally approved. It only needs to resonate. Think about your life like a mosaic. From a distance, it forms a picture. But up close? It's just a bunch of weird, broken tiles, some shiny, some jagged, some covered in spaghetti sauce. Your brain's job, during these moments of quiet reflection, is to sit on the floor, sorting through the pieces, trying to see which ones belong together. And this isn't about overanalyzing everything until your brain melts. It's about listening when something rings. That's the sound of your deeper mind whispering, "This matters." Pay attention. Here's something interesting, memory isn't a neutral process. Every time you recall something, you reconstruct it, adding new details, rearranging context, even emotionally coloring it to match your current mood. That's why a memory can shift from funny to sad depending on the day. Your brain is constantly reworking its own narrative. And in those moments of deep thought, it grabs old threads and starts weaving new tapestries out of them. So don't be surprised if you suddenly remember something you haven't thought about in years. A phrase someone said. The smell of your childhood kitchen. A note you wrote and never sent. These things rise to the surface because they're trying to mean something. You just need to stay still long enough to hear what they're saying. And the symbols? They'll start speaking too. You'll notice recurring numbers. You'll dream in colors. You'll start reading strange significance into street signs and song lyrics. And while some of that may be coincidence, some of it might be your deeper self using the only language it knows, imagery. Emotion. Connection. It's like your subconscious doesn't text, it paints murals. That shift in energy leads us somewhere else, imagination. Not fantasy. Not escapism. But imagination as a tool for integration. It's how you reach across the divide between what you know and what you sense. It's how you take the logical leftovers of your life and give them flavor. This is why art feels so meaningful. Music, painting, poetry, they bypass the rational mind and plug directly into your emotional center. They deliver meaning like 4 drips into your soul. You don't have to explain why a piece of music makes you cry. You just feel it. And maybe that's the real gift of symbols, they don't require permission from your intellect. They just show up. unapologetic, untranslatable, raw. And in doing so, they remind you that you are not a machine. You are a myth in motion. A story still being written. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift into dreams of staircases that go nowhere and oceans made of glass, let your mind do what it loves most, follow patterns. Chase symbols. Let the strange imagery wash over you without needing it to make sense. Because maybe the meaning isn't in the explanation. Maybe the meaning is in the feeling. And now, as your thoughts spiral into metaphors and dream imagery, something else starts to unravel: your obsession with progress. You may not even realize it, but you've probably been carrying a hidden assumption all your life, that your worth depends on movement. That you should always be advancing, improving, leveling up, becoming more productive, more optimized, more something. But what if that belief is quietly wrecking your ability to feel any real meaning? You've grown up in a culture that worships the straight line: start here, go there, don't stop. Education, career, relationships, goals, they're all sold as progress bars you're meant to fill. And when you stop filling them, that internal voice kicks in. You're falling behind. You should be doing more. What are you even contributing right now? It's exhausting. And it's also wrong. Here's something surprising. Psychologists who study subjective well-being have found that people often report the most meaningful periods of life not during upward growth, but in stillness, recovery, even struggle. Meaning doesn't always bloom in motion. It often sprouts in the quiet dirt of stuckness. That old belief that progress is the same as purpose? That's just a story. And stories can be rewritten. There remains considerable disagreement about whether human development is truly linear or cyclical. Developmental psychologists like Piaget and Erikson suggested step-like growth stages, each leading to the next. But other thinkers, particularly in Eastern philosophies, view growth as something circular, seasonal. Not forward, but inward. Not climbing a ladder, but deepening into a spiral. And if you tune in deeply, you'll start to feel it in yourself. You don't grow in neat increments. You circle back to the same lessons. You face the same fears at different depths. You think, haven't I already dealt with this? Yes. And now again, but differently. Deeper. Slower. More honest this time. Here's a quirky detail. In Japan, there's a term called ma, which roughly translates to the space between. It's the pause in music. The silence in conversation. The rest in a piece of art. And it's just as important as the notes themselves. Your life, too, needs ma. Space. Pause. The moment when nothing productive is happening, so something deeper can rise. But you've probably been taught to fill every inch. If there's downtime, you must be lazy. If you're not growing, you must be shrinking. But what if you're just composting? Yes, composting. Think of it. Nothing glamorous about it, but it's necessary. Leaves rot. Time passes. Nutrients return to the soil. Then, eventually, something beautiful grows. You don't rush that process. You don't yell at the soil to work faster. You wait. And trust. And let it get weird and earthy and dark. Progress, as you've known it, has a shadow side. It can trick you into living for the future. Always seeking the next milestone. The next fix. The next accomplishment to post or journal about. But what you end up missing, tragically, is the now. The sacred, ordinary, quiet now. You might find this surprising. People nearing the end of life often speak about time differently. They don't talk about their resumes. They talk about moments. Sunlight through leaves. Laughter in a kitchen. Sitting with someone they loved in complete silence. These are not progress markers. They're presence markers. They matter because they were fully lived. And what's wild is, deep thinking often feels like regression before it feels like growth. You go backward. You slow down. You pause to examine things others brush past. You sit with doubts instead of smothering them. And from the outside, it looks like nothing's happening. But something is happening. Below the surface. Quietly. Remember that time you took a break, maybe between jobs, or after a breakup, or just because your soul was tired? And people asked, "What's next?" And you didn't have an answer? And it made you squirm? That discomfort is the cultural echo of the progress myth. Because here's the truth, your worth is not in what you're doing next. It's in your being. You're noticing. You're choosing to exist with intention, even if that intention is to simply rest. One framework that challenges the Western obsession with linear growth is the indigenous concept of right relationship. Rather than progress, it emphasizes balance, with yourself, with others, with the earth. It's not about conquering time, but honoring cycles. Learning when to plant and when to wait. When to act and when to be still. Imagine what would shift if you embraced that. If you stopped judging your value by how busy or impressive you appear, and started measuring meaning by how aligned you feel. What if your still moments were just as sacred as your action? What if staying in bed this morning, eyes open, heart gently wondering, was a form of deep work? That's not regression. That's wisdom. Just a quirky little add-on. In Celtic spirituality, they speak of thin places, moments where the veil between the mundane and the divine is especially thin. You don't create these moments through hustle. You encounter them. Usually when you least expect it. Usually when you slow down enough to notice. So tonight, in the softness of your bed, in the long pause between heartbeats, allow yourself this thought: you don't need to be getting somewhere. You already are somewhere. This moment is not an in-between. It is not a failure to grow. It is the growth. Life is not a ladder. It's a circle. A spiral. A tide. A season. Let yourself rest in that rhythm. Let the meaning rise slowly. You've spiraled in and out of cycles, let go of linear pressure, and started to feel the rhythm of a slower, more meaningful life. But now it's time to zoom all the way out, to the cosmic level. The galactic zoom out. The terrifying, thrilling, brain-melting perspective that you are, in the most literal sense, a tiny blip on a tiny rock orbiting a mid-sized star in a corner of a very average galaxy. Yeah. That perspective. At first, it sounds like a punchline to an existential joke. You're a speck in the void. Your lifespan is a flicker. You're made of the same atoms as dead stars and sandwich crumbs. But weirdly enough, that cosmic insignificance? It doesn't kill meaning. It creates it. You, the tiny cosmic fluke, are here. Conscious. Curious. Capable of wonder. That alone is ridiculous, and kind of magnificent. Here's something unexpected. Astrophysicist Carl Sagan used to remind people that we are a way for the universe to know itself. You're not separate from the cosmos. You are the cosmos, conscious and self-reflecting. You're not staring into space like it's a TV screen. You're made of it. You're a pocket of stardust that suddenly learned how to think in metaphors and cry at movie trailers. Let that sink in for a second. Because when you shift into this macro lens view, something quietly profound happens. Your problems don't disappear, but their proportions change. That awkward conversation, that missed deadline, that question you keep asking about what your purpose is, they all start to feel lighter. Not irrelevant. But less suffocating. Less final. And that softening creates room for something deeper to emerge: gratitude. Not the performative kind, not the "I should be thankful" kind. But a kind that bubbles up when you realize you get to be alive for a while. You get to look at clouds. Eat blueberries. Hug people. Tell stories. Stare at the moon. Make a mess of things. Try again. That's the real miracle, not that you figured it all out, but that you even got the chance. A long-standing debate in existential psychology concerns this very idea, whether the vastness of the universe renders life meaningless or elevates its urgency. Thinkers like Sartre lean toward the former. If life has no predetermined meaning, then we must create it ourselves. Others, like Viktor Frankl, argued that this freedom is precisely what makes meaning possible. Without fixed destiny, you get to choose. And the choosing? That's what gives life color. You might find this surprising. The odds of you existing, you specifically, with your DNA, your personality, your oddly specific collection of fears and favorite snacks, are estimated to be around 1 in 400 trillion. That's not a typo. 400 trillion. You are statistically absurd. A living, breathing improbability. And yet, here you are. Listening. Thinking. Feeling things. Trying to make sense of it all. That doesn't make you insignificant. That makes you precious. Just a quirky detail. The ancient Stoics used to practice something called contemplatio naturae, contemplation of nature, as a way to expand their perspective. They'd sit and look at the stars, not to feel small, but to remember that they were part of something ancient and immense. That they were woven into the fabric of the universe, even if they didn't understand how. When you feel tiny in the face of all this, it's not a sign that you don't matter. It's an invitation to let go of the illusion that you need to be the center of it all. Meaning doesn't require you to be big. It asks you to be present. It's like standing at the edge of the ocean. You're not in control. You're not significant in the way empires are. But you're part of the view. Part of the whole. And that's enough. There's actually a name for this feeling, the overview effect. Astronauts who see Earth from space report a profound shift in perspective. They stop thinking in terms of nations or identities. They see Earth as one fragile, beautiful sphere, floating in darkness. And when they return, everything looks different. Arguments feel smaller. Nature feels holier. Life feels like a gift. You don't need a rocket to get there. Just a moment. Just this moment, right now. A breath. A long, slow exhale. A feeling of wonder. Because the truth is, you're not too small to matter. You're exactly the size you need to be. A single note in a much larger song. And the song? It wouldn't be the same without you. So when you catch yourself spiraling into the "what's the point" abyss, try this: zoom out. Way out. Past the errands and notifications and what-ifs. Past your to-do list. Past even your identity. Let yourself float for a moment in the idea that you belong to the cosmos. Not because you earned it, but because you are it. And here's the paradox that deep thinkers always run into: the more you confront your smallness, the more sacred everything starts to feel. That cup of tea. That late-night conversation. That beam of sunlight hitting your floor just right. When nothing is guaranteed, everything becomes meaningful. So maybe you don't need to find your purpose tonight. Maybe you just need to remember that you're already part of something so much bigger than you can ever fully grasp. And in that remembering, something stirs. Something quiet. Something ancient. Call it awe. Call it connection. Call it grace. But whatever it is, it doesn't need to be solved. It just needs to be felt. After floating out into the cosmic scale, you begin to fall gently back into yourself. The vastness shrinks. The stars dim into background hum. And something quieter, closer, more human emerges: your relationships. The people in your life. The faces, the voices, the memories. The ones who've loved you, irritated you, held space for you, or left you wondering who you are when they're gone. Because here's something both obvious and quietly revolutionary: connection isn't just emotional support. It's a thinking tool. You've been taught to treat deep thought as a solo act. The quiet genius. The philosopher alone in a cabin. The tortured artist. And yes, solitude is part of the process. But meaning? Meaning doesn't thrive in a vacuum. It grows in reflection. In conversation. In shared stories. You think better, deeper, when you're connected to others. Here's something unexpected: Studies in social cognition have shown that the human brain literally lights up differently in the presence of others. Mirror neurons, emotional resonance, cognitive empathy, they all activate. Your thoughts get sharper, more nuanced, when they're bouncing off someone else's brain. You reflect more clearly because you're being reflected. This is why late-night conversations hit differently. Why talking with someone you trust can lead you to insights you didn't even know were buried in you. You start saying things out loud and suddenly you're like, wait. That's how I really feel? Yes. That's how your truth sounds when it finally finds a voice. An odd but true fact, the word dialogue comes from the Greek dia, through, and logos, meaning. So literally, dialogue means meaning flowing through. It's not just talk. It's a current. And when you're part of a real dialogue, one that's open, vulnerable, messy, you start to understand yourself through the lens of another person's listening. But here's the twist, connection isn't always pleasant. In fact, it's often through friction, conflict, disagreement, and rupture that we really confront our own blind spots. You say something careless. They call you out. You flinch. You reflect. You grow. Or maybe someone shares a perspective that utterly rearranges your assumptions. That's deep thinking too, being willing to be revised. There remains considerable disagreement among psychologists about how much of our identity is constructed internally versus socially. Is the self something you find within? Or something shaped in the gaze of others? But what seems clear is this: humans are inherently relational. You don't just live among others, you become yourself through them. You might find this surprising. When researchers study loneliness, they're not just measuring emotional pain. Chronic loneliness actually impairs your executive function, your ability to think clearly, solve problems, and regulate your emotions. Being disconnected from others doesn't just make you sad. It makes you foggy. And that fog can keep you from doing the very kind of deep reflection that leads to meaning. But this isn't about being constantly surrounded by people. It's about quality. The presence of even one person, truly present, truly listening, can become a mirror so clear you see parts of yourself you didn't know were hiding. Maybe you've had this moment. Someone asks, "Are you really okay?" And they mean it. And your reflex is to say yes, of course, you're fine. But then something softens. Your shoulders drop. Your breath catches. And suddenly the words start tumbling out. Not rehearsed. Not curated. Just real. That's the magic of connection. It bypasses your filters. It unlocks truths you've buried under busyness. Here's something interesting. Philosophers like Martin Buber described this experience as the I-thou relationship, a sacred kind of connection where you meet someone not as an object or a role, but as a full, living mystery. No agenda. No performance. Just presence. And when you encounter another person in that way, you meet yourself differently, too. It's easy to forget that meaning isn't something you find alone in the dark. It's something you exchange. You offer your story. Someone offers theirs. You don't always agree. You don't always understand. But something passes between you that's more important than agreement: recognition. And in that moment of recognition, your thoughts expand. Your heart opens. Your world grows just enough to hold a little more truth. Now, this doesn't mean every connection is nourishing. Some aren't. Some drain you, confuse you, manipulate you into being someone smaller. And deep thinking means learning the difference, recognizing which relationships sharpen your clarity and which ones just fog up the glass. Just a quirky reminder, even introverts need connection. Not all the time. Not with everyone. But with a few chosen souls who see the raw version of you and don't flinch. People who can hold your existential spirals with a steady hand and maybe a slice of pie. So if you're on this path, this restless, reflective, meaning-chasing path, don't try to walk it completely alone. You can think deeply in silence, yes. But some of your best insights will arrive wearing someone else's voice. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe a therapist. Maybe a partner who listens without needing to fix. Maybe even a stranger who says something that shakes your inner scaffolding. And yes, sometimes the deepest connection is with someone long gone. A parent. A mentor. A version of yourself you lost along the way. Memory is a kind of dialogue too, your past self reaching forward, tapping your shoulder, whispering, "Remember who you are." So tonight, as the world around you softens into quiet, take a moment to feel the presence of someone who's helped you think more clearly. Someone whose mind sparked yours. Whose words helped shape your inner language. That connection, no matter how brief or distant, is part of your meaning. Let it stay with you as you rest. Let it be your mirror tonight. Now, with the echoes of conversation and connection still soft in your chest, we move into trickier terrain. The part of the night where your mind takes a darker turn. You know the place. That sudden dip into doubt. That queasy feeling that maybe none of this really means anything. That despite all your journaling and your metaphors and your late-night clarity, it might all just be noise on top of nothing. Welcome to the quiet panic of pointlessness. Don't worry, you're not broken. You're just human. This dread, this unease, this subtle fear that life might be an elaborate coincidence without a punchline, it's surprisingly common. In fact, it's one of the defining experiences of deep thinkers. And here's what might surprise you, that fear might be useful. Not comfortable, but useful. A 2020 psychological study on existential anxiety found that while fear of meaninglessness correlates with short-term distress, it can also trigger long-term growth. People who confront the void, honestly and intentionally, tend to rebuild stronger personal frameworks. Like controlled burns in a forest, the emptiness clears room for something more authentic. But it's not easy. The fear that life might be ultimately meaningless is like staring into a cosmic sinkhole with a flashlight made of string cheese. You shine it around hoping to find something solid. Instead, you find more darkness. So naturally, you recoil. You reach for comfort. Distraction. Achievement. Maybe a snack. Anything to make the abyss less, abyss why. And that's normal. Healthy, even. You can't live at the edge of the void full-time. But you can visit it. And when you do, when you look at it and breathe through the panic, it starts to shape you in a new way. Philosophers have long debated the nature of this fear. Is it a spiritual longing? An evolutionary quirk? A byproduct of too much free time and too little Wi-Fi? Kierkegaard called it the dizziness of freedom. Camus called it the absurd. And Buddha, interestingly, didn't fear the void. He called it emptiness, but not as a curse. As liberation. As clarity beyond clinging. You might find this surprising. Some researchers believe the human capacity to fear meaninglessness is the same mechanism that allows us to construct meaning. Like a muscle. The ache is the proof that something powerful is developing. Here's something interesting. Neuroscientists have identified the default mode network, a region of the brain active when you're not focused on external tasks. It's the place where your mind wanders, where your identity drifts, where your deepest fears and fantasies swirl. And guess what it lights up most during? Rest. Daydreaming. Deep thought. It's in those quiet, unstructured moments that the fear of pointlessness tends to rise. Which means, ironically, the fear of meaninglessness is a sign that you're doing the work. You're thinking honestly. You're not running. And yes, that can feel like emotional vertigo. But here's the gift buried inside that panic: you get to decide what matters. It's not assigned to you. It's not hidden in a riddle or locked in a destiny vault. It's in your hands. Terrifying? Yes. Empowering? Absolutely. Just a quirky fact, in ancient Mesopotamia, people believed the gods were bored and invented humans to entertain them. Seriously. Your entire species was considered divine amusement. That's either bleak or hilarious depending on your caffeine levels. But the point is, cultures have always wrestled with this fear. It's not new. It's not even rare. What's rare is looking it in the eye and saying, okay, even if there's no grand design, I'm still going to love, create, help, feel, and try. Because that choice? That's where the power is. Not in being certain, but in being willing. You're not here to solve life like a math problem. You're here to live it. To lean into the not knowing and still do your laundry. Still check in on your friends. Still laugh at memes and cry at sunsets and wonder why the smell of old books makes you feel like everything's going to be okay. You, dear thinker, are allowed to fear that none of this matters, and still give it meaning anyway. There's a term for that, existential resilience. It's the ability to feel the full weight of uncertainty and keep showing up. Not just surviving, but caring, creating, connecting. Knowing full well that everything is temporary and still choosing to build something beautiful. Maybe that's what meaning really is, the stuff you choose to do in spite of the void. So when that heavy silence rolls in, the kind that makes you question it all, don't fight it. Don't rush to fix it. Just sit with it. Let the weight settle. Let it press you into the earth a little. And then, slowly, gently, begin again. Write something. Call someone. Make tea. Name 3 things you love. Remind yourself that you can be afraid and still be free. Let that fear be fuel. Let it carve space for your next version. Let it whisper, if nothing is certain, then anything is possible. And as you lie there tonight, listening to the quiet hum of your thoughts, know this, that ache you feel, that gentle terror, it's not proof that you're lost. It's proof that you're looking. And looking is the first step toward meaning. So, you've stared into the void. Not just peeked at it, you sat with it, breathed through it, maybe even made tea for it. And once you've done that, once you've allowed the fear of pointlessness to settle in your bones without letting it break you, something curious happens next. Your shadow starts to stir. Not your literal shadow, unless you're into candlelit journaling, in which case, very on brand. This is the psychological shadow, the part of you that carries everything you'd rather not admit. The traits you hide, the memories you suppress, the truths you flinch away from. Every deep thinker meets their shadow eventually. Because if you're really going to live with meaning, not just talk about it, you can't ignore the parts of you that contradict your best intentions. The selfishness. The envy. The fear. The ego. The craving to be liked. The tendency to ghost people when things get emotionally complicated. Yep, all of it. And this isn't about guilt-tripping yourself. It's about integration. About seeing yourself clearly enough to accept the whole mosaic, not just the shiny tiles. Here's something surprising. Carl Jung believed the shadow isn't your worst self, it's your unclaimed self. The parts you've disowned. The anger you were taught to repress. The power you gave away. The confidence you buried under self-deprecation. Your shadow contains your gold, but you've got to dig through some pretty spicy psychological compost to find it. Just a quirky fact, in ancient Egyptian mythology, the shadow, called Shut, was considered a literal part of the soul. It followed you everywhere, even in the afterlife. You couldn't escape it. Which feels about right, doesn't it? A long-standing debate exists among psychologists about whether shadow work, confronting and integrating unconscious parts of the self, is a therapeutic necessity or a risky spiral. Some argue it's essential for authenticity. Others caution that it can lead to navel-gazing or emotional overwhelm if not done carefully. But either way, the consensus is this: you can't become whole if you keep pretending parts of you don't exist. You might already know what's in your shadow. That memory that makes you wince. That judgment you pass on others that secretly mirrors your own insecurities. That manipulative impulse you justify as just being honest. Shadow work means dragging those pieces into the light, not to punish them, but to understand them. Because here's the truth: if you don't own your shadow, it owns you. It shows up when you're tired. When you're triggered. When someone gets too close. It sabotages your relationships, poisons your ambitions, and hides behind your perfectionism. You don't get to outsmart it. But you can outlove it. Deep thinking demands that you look at yourself fully. Not just the part of you that meditates and reads meaningful books and says, "I'm working on myself." But also the part that sulks, the part that self-sabotages, the part that secretly wishes failure on people you envy. Yep. That part. Still you. But something magical happens when you stop pretending. You start to relax. Because trying to be the good, perfect, healed version of yourself is utterly exhausting. It's like holding in a breath for years. And shadow work lets you exhale. You don't have to be pure. You just have to be real. Here's something interesting. Research on self-concept clarity, how well people understand and accept themselves, shows a strong correlation with life satisfaction. And it's not about how positive your self-image is. It's about how accurate it is. In other words, the more honest you are with yourself, the better you feel. Even if that honesty is messy. So how do you actually do this shadow thing without getting lost in emotional molasses? Start small. Notice what makes you reactive. Notice what you judge harshly in others. Pay attention to what you downplay, deflect, or nervously laugh off. These are often breadcrumbs leading back to your shadow. You don't need to dig it all up in one night. Just notice. Get curious. Ask, what's under this? And yes, it might hurt. But not forever. In fact, some of your most meaningful moments, the ones that changed you, softened you, broke you open, probably involved a shadow being met with kindness. When someone saw your mess and stayed. When you forgave yourself for something you thought was unforgivable. When you looked in the mirror and said, "Okay, I'm not proud of this, but I'm still worthy." You can do that for yourself, too. Just a quirky reminder, the Japanese art of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty. Shadow work is emotional kintsugi. Your flaws become lines of power. Not despite the damage, but because of it. So tonight, as the world quiets down and you find yourself alone with your thoughts, ask gently, what have I been hiding from myself? What part of me needs a little less shame and a little more light? You don't need to fix it all. You just need to let it be seen. Because real meaning doesn't come from being polished. It comes from being whole. By now, you've looked at yourself from every angle, curious, compassionate, sometimes a little terrified. You've met your shadow, questioned your beliefs, and maybe even started to see the quiet power in owning the less curated parts of you. But there's one final threshold most deep thinkers stumble upon, and almost always resist at first. Stillness. Not quiet like, no music playing. Not silence like, don't talk for a minute. This is deeper. This is the kind of stillness that feels like you're floating in space with nothing to hold on to. The kind that, at first, feels like you're being swallowed whole. Because stillness is a lot like drowning, until it's not. And you know this already, don't you? That feeling when the noise dies down and your mind has nothing to focus on. The moment after the podcast ends. After the scroll stops. After the friend leaves. After the task is done. What's left is just you. And that's where it gets uncomfortable. Here's something surprising. Many people, maybe even most, will go to absurd lengths to avoid being alone with their thoughts. In one now famous study, researchers at the University of Virginia found that a large number of participants preferred receiving mild electric shocks over spending 15 minutes alone in a room with nothing to do. Yes. Actual volts. Rather than just sitting. Why? Because stillness forces you to listen to what's under the surface. And let's be honest, most of the time, it's a mess down there. Worries. Regrets. Replays. That weird thing you said in 8th grade. All of it floats up like bubbles from a sunken ship. And yet, this is where the real work happens. In the stillness. In the quiet rooms of your own mind. There's a long-standing conversation in contemplative psychology about whether stillness is inherently healing, or whether it merely reveals what needs to be healed. Some traditions say stillness is the destination. Others say it's just the opening. Either way, one thing is certain: if you avoid it, you stay on the surface of yourself forever. Just a quirky fact: in monastic traditions like those of Trappist monks or Zen Buddhist practitioners, entire days, or even years, are devoted to silence. Not as punishment, but as invitation. Because without constant distraction, the ego runs out of scripts. The performative self gets tired. And eventually, what's left is a deeper self. The one that isn't trying so hard. But it takes time to get there. And the path goes straight through discomfort. You might find this surprising: early in a stillness practice, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, or just staring at your ceiling for 10 minutes, your brain actually increases in noise. It's like a toddler throwing a tantrum after the Wi-Fi goes out. It panics. Floods you with random thoughts. Anything to avoid the void. But if you wait, just wait, you start to notice a shift. The thoughts don't stop, but they soften. The panic quiets. The mental chatter becomes like distant birdsong instead of a screaming radio. And somewhere in that stillness, clarity sneaks in. You realize that many of your loudest fears are just echoes. That the things you've been running from aren't as monstrous as they felt in motion. That your identity doesn't need to be rebuilt every hour. That it's okay to just be. Stillness is where the deep stuff rises. The noticings. The grief that never had a chance to speak. The longing you've buried under being fine. The quiet joy that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but hums in the background like the fridge at 2 a.m. It's in this space that truth finds you. Not the truth someone else told you to believe. But the truth that feels true. The kind you don't have to argue with. The kind that just is. And the thing is, you don't need a cabin in the woods to find it. You don't need a meditation app, although go ahead if it helps. You just need a moment where you stop reaching, stop performing, stop editing your thoughts for approval. Just you, with your breath, and a little willingness to stay. You might be wondering, what am I supposed to do in stillness? And the honest answer? Nothing. That's the point. You let it unfold. You notice what arises. You feel what comes up. You listen. If your mind races, you let it. If you get bored, that's okay too. Stillness isn't about achievement. It's about presence. Just a quirky image: think of stillness like a snow globe that's been shaking for years. When you stop moving it, even if it feels awkward, the flakes start to settle. The scene becomes clear. That's what your mind is doing. Settling. Revealing. And what it reveals might surprise you. Maybe you find a tenderness you forgot you had. Maybe an old memory rises, begging for closure. Maybe an idea sparks, the kind you weren't chasing, but that somehow found you anyway. Or maybe nothing happens. And that, too, is perfect. Because stillness doesn't exist to reward you with revelations. It exists to restore you. To give your soul space to breathe. To remind you that you don't need to be constantly moving to be alive. So tonight, as you lie still, whether in bed or simply in your thoughts, don't rush past the discomfort. Let it sit beside you like a guest you're still learning to trust. No need to entertain it. Just let it be. Let you be. You're not failing because stillness feels hard. You're not broken because your mind fidgets. That's just the surface reacting. The deeper part of you? It's quiet. Patient. Waiting. Let the layers peel back. Let the noise fade out. Let the truth come forward, softly, slowly. And when it does, listen. By now, you've touched stillness. Not perfectly, because there's no perfect, but honestly. You've started to notice what surfaces when the noise dies down. You've watched your shadow flicker. You've allowed the ache of meaninglessness to hum in your chest without instantly silencing it. And in the quiet, something else begins to rise. Something subtler, but so powerful. Your story. Not the one you tell others. Not the LinkedIn version. Not the one filtered through nostalgia or shame. But the living story, ever-shifting, deeply personal, written in real time by every thought you think, every choice you make, every memory that replays with just a little more softness each time. Because here's the thing, your story isn't fixed. It keeps rewriting itself. Sometimes without your permission. You might find this surprising. Psychologists who study memory, especially in the context of trauma, identity, and meaning, have found that your recollections are not stored like video files. They're reconstructed, reinterpreted. Every time you remember something, you're actually rewriting it a little. Editing the scene. Changing the tone. Updating the meaning. It's less like watching a replay and more like dreaming through an old diary page. This is why certain memories that used to sting now feel gentle. And why things that once felt small suddenly loom large. Your story isn't the past, it's the version of the past you're carrying now. And the beautiful, if slightly terrifying, truth is, you have the power to change it. Here's something interesting. Narrative therapy, a psychological approach developed in the 1980s, centers on the idea that humans make meaning through story. Not just storytelling to others, but the internal story you tell yourself. I'm someone who never finishes things. I always mess up relationships. I can't handle rejection. These are not facts. They are narrative threads. And the second you question them, you begin the rewrite. There remains considerable disagreement about how much control we truly have over our internal narratives. Some psychologists argue we're shaped primarily by early experience, set in our psychological concrete by the age of 7. Others believe we're capable of endless reinvention through reflection, language, and intention. But no matter the camp, one idea persists: stories can liberate or limit you. You get to decide which. So think for a moment. What story have you been living inside without realizing it? Who wrote its rules? Who cast you in the roles you play? Were you the fixer? The rebel? The overachiever? The one who keeps it all together? The one who never asks for help? Who told you that's who you are? And who might you be, if that part of the story ended? Just a quirky truth, in ancient times, stories were not told with happy endings. They were told in circles. A tale would end right where it began, inviting the listener to keep the thread alive. Meaning wasn't in the climax, it was in the retelling. The reflecting. The weaving of personal truth into the collective myth. You're doing that now. You don't need a final draft to feel complete. You just need to be present in your current chapter. And here's the really wild part. Even your future is already being shaped by the story you believe about your past. If you believe you're doomed to repeat mistakes, you probably will. If you believe you're unlovable, you'll interpret every delay in a reply as proof. But if you begin to shift, even slightly, into a story of curiosity, forgiveness, resilience, everything changes. This is where deep thinking becomes revolutionary. It doesn't just help you cope, it helps you edit. You start noticing the parts of your life that need new language. You catch yourself saying, "I've always been like this," and you pause. Ask, "But do I still need to be?" That pause is where the rewrite begins. You might find this helpful. One therapeutic practice involves writing a re-narrated version of a painful memory, not to erase it, but to retell it from a place of strength. You include the hurt, yes, but also the ways you've grown. The choices you've made since. The support you found. The lessons you carry. It doesn't change what happened. But it changes who you are in the telling of it. Because stories don't just describe reality, they create it. That moment you forgave yourself, quietly, in the dark. That's part of your story now. That decision to walk away even when it hurt. That counts. That night you sat with your fear and whispered, "I'm staying," even as it screamed at you to run. That, too, is a turning point. You don't need anyone else to witness it for it to be real. So tonight, maybe let this be the question that drifts through you as you begin to fade into rest. What story am I telling about myself, and is it still serving me? You don't need to rush to answers. Just ask. Just notice. Because the more you reflect, the more you'll realize, you're not just the character in the story. You're the narrator. And the narrator can always change the tone. Always shift the focus. Always find a new meaning in old pages. You are not your past. You are not your roles. You are not the voice that says you're too late, too much, too lost. You are the one telling the story. And that means, you're free. And now, after all the spiraling in and out, through boredom, clarity, symbolism, shadows, and your ever-changing story, we arrive at the quietest part of all, the part where you let go of needing to know. Let's talk about mystery. You've probably spent a lot of time looking for answers. Trying to figure it all out. Who you are. What you're meant to do. What any of this means. And maybe, somewhere along the way, you started to believe that meaning was something you'd eventually find, like a reward at the end of a well-lived life. But what if meaning isn't a destination? What if it's the space between knowing and not knowing, the warm, humming place where mystery lives? That's the soft truth most deep thinkers bump into, again and again. You reach a peak of insight, only to find another hill behind it. You dig through your past, only to uncover more layers. You sit in silence expecting a final answer and receive more questions. And slowly, something shifts. You stop needing answers to feel grounded. You start making peace with not knowing. You might find this surprising. Research in developmental psychology shows that people who score high in tolerance for ambiguity also report greater life satisfaction and emotional resilience. Meaning, those who can sit with uncertainty, without rushing to resolve it, tend to suffer less from stress and burnout. They trust that clarity will emerge, even if it's not immediate. A long-standing question in philosophy debates whether the pursuit of truth is inherently destabilizing. Can too much questioning fracture our sense of self? Or is it the only real path to freedom? Some argue for limits, guardrails to keep the mind safe. Others insist that embracing the unknowable is what keeps the soul alive. You don't have to pick a side. You just have to stay open. Here's something interesting: mystics across traditions, Sufi poets, Christian monks, Buddhist masters, reach the same paradox from different directions. The deeper you go, the more comfortable you must become with paradox itself. That life is brief and eternal. That you are small and infinite. That mystery isn't a barrier, it's a bridge. And deep thinking? It's not about eliminating uncertainty. It's about becoming fluent in it. You learn to walk through the fog without demanding it part. To feel your way forward with the lights off, guided not by certainty, but by something softer, intuition, perhaps. Or trust. Think about it, so much of what you love most in life is wrapped in mystery. Why a certain memory makes you weep. Why a stranger's kindness lingers for years. Why some music makes your chest ache like a home you've never been to. You can't explain these things. But they're real. Undeniably real. Just a quirky reminder, the Japanese concept of yugen refers to a profound awareness of the universe that triggers an emotional response too deep for words. Like watching a flock of birds scatter into the sky. Or standing alone at night with no sound but your breath. You feel it, even if you can't say what it is. That's meaning. Not defined, felt. Maybe the pressure to figure it all out has been louder than you realized. Maybe you've been measuring your inner life by how many questions you can answer. But tonight you're allowed to set that down. You don't need to resolve everything. You don't need to chase finality. You can simply rest in the wondering. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not broken for having more questions than clarity. You're evolving. You're expanding into a wider capacity for truth, one that doesn't need neat edges or tidy conclusions. One that holds contradiction in each hand and smiles anyway. So tonight, let the unknown be your blanket. Let the mystery be your pillow. Let your thoughts wander into the soft darkness and stay there, unafraid. Because you've done the work. You've asked the questions. You've sat through the silence, faced the fear, rewritten the story. And now, the final step is not another revelation. It's rest. So let your mind drift now. Let the loops uncoil, the questions soften. Let your thoughts become feathers on the breeze. No pressure to solve. No urgency to understand. Just the quiet hum of being here, now. Imagine yourself floating on your back in a lake at night. The sky above you scattered with stars you don't need to name. The water beneath you cool and calm. You're held. No resistance. No effort. Just breath and space and surrender. Let your body soften against the mattress. Let your jaw unclench. Let your thoughts become slower, rounder, softer. You've wandered through the edges of the mind tonight, through wonder and fear, clarity and confusion, silence and sound. And through it all, you kept listening. Kept asking. Kept showing up. And that's what deep thinking is. Not perfection. Not knowing everything. But being willing to be with yourself, completely. So as your breathing slows, feel the edges of your mind start to blur. The questions can wait. The insights can wait. All that matters now is that you let go. Let the thoughts pass by like clouds. Let the feelings float like leaves on a stream. Let yourself rest in the vast, quiet mystery of being. You're already part of it. You always have been.